but we appreciate everyone joining today. And I'm going to stop talking and introduce our speaker for today, Michael Zelniker, who will be speaking about his work. And this is a little bit of a change from what we normally have in terms of more of a seminar series, and this is a bit more of an interactive session with much more chance for discussion. And without further ado, I'll let Michael introduce himself and his work to you folks.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Caetano, for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. And thank you all for joining us wherever you are in Canada or other places around the world. I too am Canadian by birth. I grew up in Montreal. And I guess my love of Mother Earth, nature in general, began at a young age. I was shipped off to summer camp. I was a troubled young person, and as a result, I was always in trouble. So I hated summer camp. And summer camp for me was about 100 miles north of Montreal on the southern edge of what I now know is the Boreal Forest. I didn't know at the time. And I hated camp. I was short and lonely and always in trouble. And the one thing that saved me was this endless vista of trees and forests as far as the eye could see, right out to the edges of the horizon. And it forged in me a bond with forests and trees that has remained with me today. So much so when I'm in a forest, I feel like I'm with long lost family. And so I'm going to fast forward over the next many, many years of my life. I spent many years in the entertainment industry. I had a very successful career as an actor. I won awards. I worked with great people and did work that I'm very proud of. I taught film school for many years here in Los Angeles after moving from Canada to Los Angeles. And about a month into the pandemic, I learned that these large, intact, old-growth forest landscapes called the Boreal Forest across the northern part of Canada that circle the globe, kind of a green halo that circles the globe, that they were being cut down for the manufacture of toilet paper. You may remember at the beginning of COVID, the one thing we were hoarding was toilet paper, of all things, like it was going to save us. And so outraged learning this, I began to do some research. One thing led to another. And 3 months later, I was on a plane to Vancouver, quarantined for 14 days, as we had to do in the early days of COVID, before embarking on a 42-day journey right across the Boreal. Among the most important things I learned, of course, in my early research was the Boreal is also home to more than 600 First Nations communities. So in my mind, if you're going to tell a story about the Boreal Forest, you need to allow the people who have the people who have lived on the Boreal for many, many generations tell that story. Little did I know that what they wanted to talk about was different than what I thought I was coming to talk about with them. I thought I was making a documentary about trees and toilet paper. But when they welcomed me into their communities with a quality of hospitality that I've rarely experienced in my life, they wanted to talk about colonization and the Indian Act and residential schools and the 60s scoop. What ultimately happened as a result of these conversations, and one of the great opportunities that documentary filmmaking provide, as opposed to a narrative film, a scripted film, is you never really know what your story is until you begin speaking to the people whose voices and stories you're seeking to uplift. And what I learned through the experience of making The Issue a Tissue, a Boreal love story, this feature film and also six-part series, is there is an inextricable connection, a link between unfettered extractive industrial exploitation and colonial violence. And I think what distinguishes The Issue a Tissue, and I don't know if any of you have had an opportunity to see it, it's played all over Canada and the United States and even in Europe. I think what distinguishes it from just another movie about eco-destruction is that it draws a direct link between colonial violence and unfettered extractive exploitation. I've come to believe that they are inextricably linked. So as I traveled around in 2023 with the movie, people kept asking me, what next, what next, what next? And what kept coming up was water. And as I began to do some research on the subject of water, I learned some absolutely stunning statistics, like more than 2 billion people don't have access to clean, safe drinking water. As many as 4 billion don't have access to reliable, consistent sanitation. Women and girls spend 250 million hours a day fetching water. That's a day, 250 million hours a day. That takes my breath away, thinking about what they could be doing if they had no choice but to fetch water. Another reality I discovered as I eventually traveled around the world, traveling to 21 countries over 219 days, was that women and girls are really leading the fight to protect and defend water. As a result of these travels, partnering with various women around the world, I have 8 partners who share the writing credit with me. They're not filmmakers, they're just people who work in community, trying to uplift and trying to remediate the struggles that these communities are undertaking in their lives. These 8 women led me into their communities. They became a kind of conduit or a liaison of trust. If I could describe what I believe my mission as a documentary filmmaker is today, it's to try and uplift the voices and stories of those who have for too long been ignored. Marginalized communities, frontline communities, communities that are being impacted by the issues that many of us here in the West, in affluent countries, don't really have much of an understanding of. I will tell you that the overarching feeling I left these communities with at the end of the day of filming was, what is wrong with those of us who live in affluent countries that we've allowed some members of our human family to fall so far behind? So I'm going to share a 6-minute plus preview with you that we cut. We actually just held our first screenings at the Berlin International Film Festival, the Berlinale. It was attended by about 40 people. It was an industry screening. It wasn't actually a public screening, and industry screenings are always a little bit intimidating because people get up, walk in the middle, leave in the middle. There's a lot of shuffling and coughing and talking, and there was none of that. People were absolutely riveted. And I say that not to take credit for what we've created. I don't. I say that because of the profound intimacy, the quality of intimacy that people shared their stories with me and with those of us who came to their communities. There's a powerful exchange that happens when you show up in communities with people who are not used to being listened to, or not used to being heard. And when you show up without an agenda, with a camera willing to listen with respect to what they need to talk about, they crack themselves open, they open their hearts, and they share their stories because they're grateful for the opportunity that someone is even willing to listen to them. So I'm going to pass it over to Kelsey now. She's going to share this 6.5-minute preview with you, and I welcome the conversation and questions you may have afterwards. Thank you.
El agua la consideramos como la sangre de la madre tierra. O ser humano sem água não vive. Os seres vivos sem água não vivem.
There's still more than 2 billion people without access to safely managed drinking water.
Everything relies on water, and if we don't have water, then we won't have humanity.
मला एकच म्हणायचंय की पाण्याविना माणूस मरता कामा नये.
People are suffering from lack of things that are human rights, and that is wrong. That is simply and plain wrong.
We want water to drink, to stay alive, because we are human beings.
We have the right to love. And if we love, we must have water.
The UN says, what is the human rights?
Estamos hablando de personas que tienen derecho, no es que pidan el favor, si es posible. No, no, tienen derecho.
You can have all the human right to water, but if there's no clean water, or if the groundwater's gone, or if you've polluted that lake beyond use, what good is it to have the human right to water?
Toda esta pampa tenía que estar el lago si hubiera llovido más antes, ¿no?
Muy escasa el agua. Y pues es triste pensar que nosotros somos principales causales de esta escasez.
Al paso de los años y las cosas que vamos haciendo, después nos vamos a matar por el agua, por tener un poquito de agua.
This is the only water for drinking, for food, for bathing, for washing.
Yes, we know that water is not clean, but when you are thirsty, you are thirsty. You want to drink. You drink whatever is in front of you.
That used to be filled of clean water, but now it is a dumping ground.
Our river is not a dumping river. It's not a place to dump your toxins.
Ya no es lo que un río debe ser fuente de vida, sino solamente es fuente de tristeza, oscuridad y desolación.
The people making the decision to release that contaminated wastewater, they don't do it right next to the water they're going to drink. They do it next to water that somebody else is going to drink.
Dizendo eles que a água está boa, mas é porque eles não vêm beber, né?
Tenemos una de las mayores lagos de agua contaminada de Europa.
And these are the people we're supposed to trust? That's a crime, and they should be punished for that.
You know, it's really a system that purely works for those who can afford.
They are pressing us down to pay for the water.
El agua es para correr, es para cantar, su cauce, para ser libre, y empezamos a embotellarla.
Bottled water, which is one of the worst forms of privatization because it also involves massive pollution. We are buying about 1 million bottles of plastic water every minute in the world.
If you had told me that people in the US would be drinking 47 gallons per person on average of bottled water, I would have thought you were giving me the plot to a dystopian novel.
It's putting precious, sacred groundwater into a piece of plastic garbage.
This bottling plant and bottling water in general is symbolic of the severing of our relationship to water.
So all this water that should be going for all of us, it's going into bottles and being sold for huge profits.
I will never pay for water. Never.
เราต่อสู้ตรงนี้อะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะหรือว่า
It's our job to say, hey, we want you to listen to us because we're the caretakers, you're the takers, and those takers have to stop taking.
No a la industrialización insostenible.
En vez que nos venga a quitar, que nos deben ayudarse, ayudar de cómo mantener nuestra madre tierra.
It's us that has to worry. It's not the earth. She's going to be okay.
La naturaleza simplemente nos está pasando factura de lo que nosotros mismos hemos ocasionado.
Es triste porque pues el mayor destructor del hombre pues es el hombre.
¿Qué futuro le estamos dejando a nuestros nietos? No nos interesa lo que pasa a los otros. No nos damos cuenta cómo de alguna manera repercute ese daño en nosotros.
Si nosotros seguimos con esa misma actitud de no cuidar el agua, el resultado puede ser catastrófico.
Es imposible regresar el tiempo, pero que sí es posible hacer algo.
El agua como un bien común. Comunes a preservar y a gestionar de manera sostenible. Y enfocar la gestión de esos recursos y de esos sistemas bajo un enfoque basado en los derechos humanos.
ก็เป็นของตั้งหลายเป็นของโทลกโทเมืองเนาะนำทั้งหมดทั้งเสียงเนาะไฟใจกะก็ไหลเนาะ
¿Qué más puedo decir? El agua lo es todo.
Water is life.
Agua é vida, não é?
Water is life. น้ำก็คือชีวิต Agua é vida, né?
Water is life.
Agua é vida.
El agua es vida.
How do I come back on?
You're on.
Oh, good.
Fantastic. Right. Thank you. So we'll open the, I didn't put it on the chat, but you can drop any questions on the chat or just raise your hand and we'll take them in order and I'll do some of the moderation. So any questions for Michael? Maybe while we're warming up, I have a question for you, Michael. And I mean, you alluded to this. Oh, hang on. I don't like to take moderator privileges. So Monisha, do you want to unmute, and I'll do mine at the end.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, just a question to get to know your work a bit more. I was wondering how you chose which communities to go visit, and I was also wondering whether there was anything that you found that really surprised you about like what people were saying and what their experiences were.
I'm a big believer that the process itself informs the process. And when you're working on a project like this that is so large, and I do everything myself, I shoot it, I edit it, I do the research myself, with, limited resources, I've come to understand that you have to trust where the process is leading you. So one conversation leads to another conversation, which forges another connection and so on. So I knew early on that I was going to go to Alberta and talk to the people, the First Nations communities living north of the tar sands mines. I already had a connection with some of them anyway from the Issue. And I made arrangements with some other people, mostly First Nations peoples in Ontario. I knew that the plastic bottled water industry was going to be a small segment of this, and it is. It's about half an episode. So about 1/16 of it is on the plastic bottled water industry. And there are activists all over North America who are fighting against, what used to be Nestle, and then it was called, I can't remember the name of it, and now it's Primo Brands. So there are people in Maine and in Colorado and in California and in Southern Ontario that are fighting. So there were people that I knew I wanted to meet in Canada and the US. So that was the first part of the trip. I knew through some people with Blue Communities, an NGO that Maud Barlow started. Maybe some of you know who Maud Barlow is. She helped the initiative to bring the United Nations to pass the resolution that access to clean, safe water is a human right in 2010. So Maud has been involved in the water space since the 1980s. So she helped connect me with a water gathering of community people who work on community water systems in Popayan in Colombia, and that was in September 2023. I went there, met a whole bunch of people that then connected me with people in South Africa and other places. I had attended the Indigenous Forum in New York City, the UN Permanent Indigenous Forum, every year in March. In 2023, I met somebody from Cameroon, not from Cameroon, from Uganda and Rwanda. The Cameroon person I met through the Climate Reality Project. I'm a Climate Reality Project. So this is how it went. And all I knew was that October, I was in Canada and the United States. December, I went to Mexico. January, February of 24, I was in Colombia, Bolivia, Paraguay, Brazil. Even the Brazil part of it happened at the last minute because we couldn't get into Argentina with a rental car. So we had to reconfigure, and this all happened within a day or two. Fortunately, if you're a good researcher, you can find NGOs who are working in communities. So when we knew we were going to go to another part of Paraguay where the Itaipu Dam is, the second largest hydro dam in the world, we found an NGO that could bring us into the community, a community that had been displaced many years ago because of this dam. And we're living on a road, literally between a forested area that was part of their traditional territory that they were no longer allowed to go into because it had been designated as a nature preserve. And an industrial farm. So that's the way it went. Africa was then in March, and again, that happened because of conversations and people and so on. I could go through it all, but I'll leave it there. Oh, did anything surprise me? Everything, all of it. But perhaps, the most striking place I visited is the Sundarbans, which is the largest coastal delta in the world. It's on the southeast part of India into Bangladesh. We see more and more places around the world becoming uninhabitable. We experienced it here in Los Angeles last January when we had the wildfires, wipe out 2 very large communities. But in the Sundarbans, they're living, when I was there, it was 50 degrees Celsius, 60, 70% humidity. They don't have any air conditioning. They have very little infrastructure. Because of sea level rise, during monsoon season, their villages often get washed away. They've built this road by hand. It's sort of this lifted road that separates them from the water and their communities that gets overrun by water during monsoon season. So we see that, more and more communities around the world are becoming uninhabitable, but these people do not want to leave. This is their home. This is their traditional territory. This is where their ancestors have been for generations, and they love it, and they love living there. So unfortunately, the reality is that we see, because of the consequences of the climate crisis, that more and more places around the world are becoming uninhabitable. Today, we know that there are approximately 10 million refugees because of these kinds of climate events. And we see the kind of xenophobia we have around the world. It's estimated that we will have close to 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. So I say this not to scare people. I say this because we must demand more of our policymakers, because we are facing literally an emergency.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Yeah, like I actually think it's really interesting that people want to stay where their homes are. Like I think that we hear about climate refugees, and whenever I hear about them personally, I think that, oh, okay, maybe people are wanting to leave, and so we need to make it easier for them to migrate out. But yeah, maybe I think it sounds like the first task to do is to make sure that that's like a last resort kind of thing. So yeah, thanks for that insight.
The people I met do not want to leave the communities that they've grown up in and that they have a history to. In my documentary, you'll see, normally what we call the lower third, where you identify the person. For 3 reasons, we do not identify people. In some communities, like in Oaxaca, we jeopardize people's lives by identifying them for speaking out about these issues. Number 2, many of the people we met they don't speak English, they don't write, they either signed a release form with a fingerprint or an X. And number 3, these people identify themselves with the place they come from. And so our lower third is their territory. We identify the community as they call it. And that's how they identify themselves, with the place they're from. They're rooted in these places.
Thanks. I'm just seeing there's a bit of movement here in the chat, Michael, and one of the questions is, and maybe you can speak to that quickly, is where can we watch it and when?
Well, again, this screening that we just had in Berlin was the very first screening we had, and we played episode 1 and 6. I think I shared the press kit with you guys.
Okay.
So if you want at some point, we can actually review what each episode covers, because there is a narrative arc to these 8 episodes. And it was important to me to try and include every aspect. The water crisis, the global water crisis, has so many dimensions. And it was important to me to try and include all of them, because I didn't want, people ask me, why did you travel to so many different places? And I didn't want anybody to turn to me after watching this and say, oh, it's only happening over there. And the reason why we tried to uplift as many of the issues as we could was because I didn't want people to say, oh, it's only happening because of that. These are so interconnected. All these issues are so interconnected. We deforest large areas of the Amazon, replace it with industrial farms, soy plantations, so we can feed the cattle that we're, now cultivating, for lack of better word. And of course, when we cut down our forests, we're disrupting the hydrological cycle. There's a relationship between the forests and the water. I always thought, wow, there are a lot of trees in the Amazon because it rains there a lot. Now I understand it rains there a lot because there are a lot of trees. There's a relationship. And this is what I think the foundational issue we're going to have to confront and reconcile is the one of what I call the disease of disconnection. Disconnection from each other, disconnection from the land, disconnection from the rest of creation. We've allowed ourselves to be brainwashed to believe that the way forward, that the way of life is to turn these elements, the rest of creation, into commodities for commercial profit. Elements that we literally depend on for our survival. Without trees and plants, no oxygen, no life. Water is life. People ask me, I open every episode with that water is life in 15 different languages. By the way, people spoke to me in 26 different languages. We open it that way because that's literally true. And when you live in a community where water is scarce for one of the wide variety of reasons, you have a lived experience that water is life. And unfortunately, too often, people are living with water that's contaminated. I saw countless women and children fetching water in contaminated streams, knowing that it's contaminated, telling me, of course we know it's contaminated. We bring it home, we drink it, we get sick, but we have no choice. This is all there is.
Yeah, I think one of the lines that stuck with me on the quotes of the video we just watched was, this is just Mother Nature sending us the invoice, right? So that was, Julie, you have your hand up. Do you want to?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Michael. Hi, Cassandra. I wanted to just reflect on the focus on women and water in the documentary, and I see in the chat our colleague in Lebanon has mentioned about male dominance in some of the water committees and such, and we've spent so much time on gender equality in Canada, feminist policy and such, and I would just be curious to hear your reflections on your experience of the reality of what that means from what you saw through the filming in the various places that you visited. Thanks.
Well, not to in any way glamorize this, but the reality is in cultures all over the world, women are responsible for the chores that involve water, cleaning, cooking, the children, all the household needs that water is a part of. And because they're responsible for those jobs in cultures all over the world, they're the first ones who know that water's an issue. We don't have enough of it. It's dirty, it's contaminated. And so I don't see a differentiation. I don't see any difference between water and life. When people say water is life, there's no truer statement in my mind. So in this quest to seek and find clean, accessible water, it's not only a quest for water, it's a quest for life. And I hope this doesn't sound sexist. I don't mean it in that way, but my sense of how life functions is women have a closer connection to life. They carry life for 9 months. When women are ready to deliver, they often announce it by saying, "My water has broken." So that closer connection, that deeper connection that many of the women I spoke with affirmed from their own perspective, this creates a drive, an insistence, an imperative that the one thing that allows life, or one of the things that allows life, water, is a necessity, is literally without water, there's no life. So I don't know how to say it in any more stark a way than that. And thankfully, as a man, you know, I would often say to the women I met, when you look at our history, in many cultures around the world, men are still in leadership positions, and it's to men that we look to solve the problems that we find ourselves in the middle of. And my question is, why are we looking to men when men are the ones who have created the problems we're having? It's the same with the market. Why do we look to the market to solve problems that the market has created? I don't understand that. So for me, in relationship with many brilliant women through this process, in partnership with many brilliant women through this process, I volunteer to stand at your shoulder, but I want you to know that I think that it's time we men cede the opportunity for women to do a much better job than we've done. And again, I hope that doesn't sound any other way except that I'm grateful to the women I have in my life, that I know in my life, and that are doing the work that is necessary to preserve life on Earth.
Thanks, Michael. It's a powerful answer, and it comes through in what I've seen of the documentary so far as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Julie, for asking that question. That's sort of where I was going to go with mine, but I think you put it in a much nicer way and couldn't have framed it better. Because it brings to mind what one of our previous speakers said, Professor Susan Elliott at Waterloo, and I can't remember the exact way she phrased it, but we always see, and it's this relationship. It brings to mind what you just said about your analogy with the rainforest, and it's there because of the rain, and also the rain is there because of. And what she said was, we often think of SDG 6, our right to like water and sanitation, but you can't have SDG 6 without SDG 5, which is gender equality. So it's one, you can't separate the two. The two are, and the film really brings it together, and this discussion too.
Well, one other thing, Caetano, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a very active member of the Climate Reality Project since 2018, when I was first trained by former Vice President Al Gore. I've been involved in various environmental organizations, NGOs over the years. 80 or 90% of the members in these organizations are always women. I think, you know, in some ways we men should be ashamed of ourselves. And I'm not comfortable being one of those men. So that's where I come down on this.
Yeah. Good. So let me just move down the chat. There's a question from Brian. Do you want to unmute, or should I read out your question, or it's a short one? Maybe I'll do it. So the question is, does the documentary provide solutions? So I guess we're looking at all the problems, but what are the positive sort of examples or moves in the right direction that you encountered? Great question.
We try to create a narrative arc through 8 episodes. So episode 7 focuses specifically on Indigenous knowledge. Again, this began for me through the issue with Tissue, the Boreal documentary, and has continued here on this. And that is, in my Boreal documentary, Elder AJ Felix from First Nation in Saskatchewan says at one point, let's be family again. Let's love each other, because when we love, we respect, and we look after each other. The concept of family within Indigenous communities, not just family amongst the human family, but amongst all of creation, this is central. And so again, the commodification of the rest of creation, turning them into products for commercial profit, this is the way we practice capitalism here in the West, in the United States, in Canada, in Western Europe, in many places around the world. And unfortunately, that model is being adopted in many parts of the developing world. I saw people farming in northern Thailand along the Burma or Myanmar border, Shan territory. And the Shan people, these people are still practicing agriculture farming with hose. But what are they doing on top of that? They're fertilizing and pesticiding the hell out of it, because they've been convinced that self-reliant farming, practicing a version of farming where they grow for themselves, their families, their communities, is not the way to go. They've been persuaded to plant what we call cash crops. And cash crops have to be planted 2 or 3 or 4 times a year. And of course, soil will not yield 2 or 3 or 4 times a year unless you fertilize the hell out of it. They know they're killing the soil. So, when I hear people say, well, our population is growing, we need to grow more food to feed our population. Why don't we start with figuring out why we're discarding about 35% of the food we're growing? Why don't we figure out how to solve that problem first before we destroy more landscape and replace it with farming, industrial farming that is. So yes, a lot of the solution we find in the way Indigenous peoples interact with the rest of creation. Again, there are some practical solutions, but I think we're beyond the point where we can just tweak the knobs a little bit. We're going to have to, I believe, accept the fact that our relationship to the rest of creation has been broken. It's been severed. And unless we restore that, unless we heal that, and come to understand that the rest of creation, they are our family. We depend on them for our very survival. And unless we treat them with the kind of respect and reciprocity, a really brilliant tree scientist I met in Switzerland, his name is Ernst Zurcher, written countless books, very well known in the sort of tree science community. At one point he said to me, we never ask ourselves what nature expects from us. We know what we want from nature. And so as long as we continue to exploit it, as long as we continue to turn it into commodities for commercial profit, we're walking a road that's not a good road. And the second part of the solution we find in episode 8, where the way women understand their relationship to the rest of creation is also uplifted. So those are the 2 places. And I'll just close by sharing a quick story with you. Sue Chiblau, a professor from, I think she's from Guelph, but her nation is in Northern Ontario, near Lake Huron. She shares a story about water. And she says, water, when we're 70% water approximately. And she says, when you watch water flowing down a stream, it may meet a rock, it goes around the rock, or over time it might erode the rock, but it keeps going, it never stops. And she says, and she's relating a story that a colleague of hers shared in terms of the perspective on water. And she says, water teaches us to never give up, to keep going. And if indeed we are made of 70% water, then that mentality, that perspective, we must embody it. We must never give up. We must never give up.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective, and I think that's what I was hoping you'd also address is what through these different episodes of what we'd see. Okay, so we are approaching the end of the hour, and I'm wondering if we have any last questions. Okay, Kirsten.
Hi, Michael. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to hold this for the WASH trainee.
No, go for
part
it.
of this talk. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think this is such fantastic work, and I'm really curious about the translation from all these different languages that you encountered, and I know many indigenous. Sorry, I'm out of breath because I just walked up some stairs. I know many indigenous cultures have different words that can't really be translated to English, and a lot of them pertain to the natural world. So I'm wondering if you came across any of these words or maybe phrases that you couldn't directly translate that taught you maybe more about how they see the environment or water, and maybe gave you a new perspective on water.
Well, we did confront that several times. Yes, indeed, that is the case. You know, the biggest challenge I had in terms of translation was when we encountered a language that really exists only in very, very small numbers still today. So Enclet, Ajureo, languages in that we encountered in Paraguay. So it had to get first translated from Enclet to Spanish and Spanish to English. So how I managed to overcome that that challenge, I had to trust the people who were doing the translation for me. You know, I would say of the 125 hours of raw footage, raw interview footage, never mind B-roll, you know, scenery and stuff. That was the biggest challenge I encountered, you know, getting everything translated. That was a big job. And just so you know, in order to conduct these interviews, and that's not even the right word, conversations, I don't do interviews, I have conversations with people. The only way we could do it and maintain the flow or avoid interrupting the flow was to have the translator that was there in person with me translate what I was saying, you know, where I wanted the conversation to start, but what they were saying to me was not translated because it would interrupt the flow. So I'm a good reader of body language and facial expression, so I gleaned what I could from their body language and their facial expression, and the conversation continued that way. But I didn't actually know literally what people were saying to me until I got home and all of this material was translated. So I will tell you, the editing process was a revelation.
Very cool to hear about the process. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So I think with this, we're going to draw the open part of this session to an end, and I want to thank, especially thank Michael for coming and sharing with us his creation or I say his curation of all these other voices that are going to come through, and we're looking forward to seeing that. And so we'll close the open part of this. Thank everyone for coming, and then we'll move on to the WASH Canada part where the trainees get to have a session with Michael and ask him other questions.
Caetano, I'm sorry.
Sure, and if you have any last, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I sometimes get diverted, as you can tell, because there's so much going on. To answer the question, when will it be available? I don't have a direct answer to that because these first screenings in Berlin, you know, the criteria under which this segment of the festival the series are selected. They only selected this year 20 series from around the world. Only 3 of them were documentary series. And the criteria they use in selecting them are series that they see have viability in the market or commercial viability, which is very gratifying to me, because for me, when you make a movie about a documentary about challenging subjects like this, of course, here in North America, many people prefer to look the other way. They don't want to know about this stuff. So that the Berlinale, the Berlin International Film Festival, which is one of the most important festivals around the world, say, we see commercial viability in this. This is very gratifying to me, because I made this movie in hopes of uplifting these voices, not only because I think it's the right thing to do, but I also believe it's our last best hope that their understanding of the crisis we're facing, we change people's minds through their heart. And for me, anybody watching our documentary, if they're not impacted, if they're not affected by what they see, they don't have a heart. So I will stay in touch with Caetano and the others. And if you want to follow what's happening, the only sort of social media place that I post is on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn, or just check my feed every now and then. Anything to do with this documentary is going to be on there. It already gives you lots of information of what's happened so far.
Perfect. Yeah, and we're quite active there as well, so we'll be sure to share it with the rest here.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent.